This is the 4.1a video, and we're going to look at samples and surveys. And our first objective is to identify the population and sample in a statistical study. So I'm sure you all know already that the idea of a sample is to get a small subset to draw conclusions about the larger population. So the population in a study is the entire group of individuals that we want information about. It's called a census when we collect data from every individual in the population. And you may have partook in the census that the United States did this year. They're just gathering information about everyone in the population. A sample is when we have a subset or a smaller group from the population that we actually collect some data from. So let's look at a couple examples of how to identify the sample and how to identify the population. A furniture maker buys hardwood in large batches. The supplier is supposed to dry the wood before shipping. Wood that isn't dry won't hold its size and shape. The furniture maker chooses 5 pieces of wood from each batch and tests their moisture content. If any piece exceeds 12% moisture, the entire batch is sent back. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the large group that they want to learn some information about? And that's going to be our population. And the sample is the pieces of wood that they actually gathered information from. So in this case, they want to test each batch. They want to test the whole batch. So the population is going to be the entire batch, and the 5 pieces that are selected and tested are going to be our sample. All right, so the 5 pieces that were selected and tested as a sample, and they wanted to test for all of the pieces of wood in the batch. Next example. Each week, the Gallup poll questions a sample of about 1,500 adults, U.S. residents, to determine national opinion of a wide variety of issues. So in this case, they haven't identified exactly what the issue is, but they want to know about all U.S. residents, and they're using a sample of 1,500. So our population is going to be all of U.S. residents. So our sample is the 1,500 adults who actually respond to the survey. It's only people we've actually heard back from. Because we'll see in a second that we're not always going to hear back when we send out a survey, and this can influence our results in a negative way. So the second objective is to identify what's called voluntary response and convenience samples and explain how they might lead to bias. So a sample survey, it's when we have an actual organized plan to collect information and a sample. And 2 bad sampling techniques are called convenience and voluntary response samples. A convenience sample is a sample selected by taking from the population individuals that are easy to reach. It's convenient. And a voluntary response sample is when people decide whether to join a sample by responding to a general invitation. So whenever you have the option to call in and give your opinion, that would be a voluntary response, or respond to an online advertisement would be voluntary response. And obviously these are going to be bad for different but obvious reasons. Generally, people that are the most opinionated are going to be the ones who call in for a voluntary response sample. Both of these result in bias, and bias is when the design is flawed and it consistently underestimates or overestimates the value that you want to know. So bias is not just bad luck in one sample, it's the result of a bad study that will consistently miss the truth about the population. And we'll look at a couple examples of that. So when you're determining bias, then you need to say 2 things. You need to say what the problem is, whether it's a convenience or a voluntary response sample, and then you need to explain if it would underestimate or if it would overestimate the truth about the population. So let's look at 3 examples here. We're going to identify the sampling method and explain why the results may be biased. So a sports writer wants to know how strongly Austin residents support the new Major League Soccer team, Austin FC. She stands outside the stadium before a game and interviews the first 20 people who enter the stadium. So first, the type of sampling method, this is a convenient sample because it's convenient for her to stand outside the stadium and interview the 20 people that enter. This will obviously lead to an overestimate of the proportion of people who support Austin City because she's only selecting people who have already elected to go to the game. So they're obviously going to be in favor and support the team. So here, the population is all Austin residents, and this sampling method is going to consistently miss the mark. It's biased. She's always, if she stands outside the stadium before a game, she's always going to overestimate the true proportion of people who support the team, because there may be people who moved in town who do not support the team or who are not in favor of building the stadium, and so it's going to overestimate the proportion. So again, it's a convenient sample that will overestimate. She's only selecting from people who are obviously fans. Example 2. Former CNN commentator Lou Dobbs doesn't like illegal immigration. One of his shows was largely devoted to attacking a proposal to offer driver's license to illegal immigrants. During the show, Mr. Dobbs invited his viewers to go to loudobbs.com to vote on the question: would you be more or less likely to vote for a presidential candidate who supports giving driver's license to illegal aliens? The result, 97% of the 7,350 people who voted by the end of the show said they were less likely. So in this case, they are asked to call in, and this is going to be an example of voluntary response because only the people that are strongly opinionated will call in. The other issue is he's trying to claim about the population of all US citizens, but he's not reaching out to all US citizens. He is only reaching out to people who are watching his show. And most likely people who are watching his show already agree with his stands on certain political issues. So they're most likely going to be calling in to confirm what he is saying, and he's already stated that he's attacking the new proposal. So again, this is voluntary response. They chose to call in or go online and respond. And the 97% is most likely an extreme overestimate because people who watch the program are already in support of his views. A farmer brings a juice company several crates of oranges a week. A company inspector looks at the 10 oranges from the top of each crate before deciding whether to buy all the oranges. So in this case, again, it's a convenient sample because they're just looking at the oranges that are on top, and it's most likely going to overestimate because the farmer would be able to put the most appealing looking oranges on top.